All right, let's dive in. Today we're tackling a fear that, well, it kind of messes with your mind a little bit.
A bit.
Okay, maybe more than a bit. It's apeirophobia, the fear of infinity.
Yes.
Now, before you think too abstract, not for me, stick around. You might be surprised how relatable this actually is, especially if you've ever, stayed up late pondering life, the universe, and everything.
It's a fear that tends to lurk in the shadows for a lot of people.
Exactly. And to help us shed some light on it, we've got a really interesting mix of stuff. Personal stories, some scientific papers, even a few attempts at humor, because, hey, why not?
Well, you need a little levity with a topic like this,
Right. So before we get lost in the infinite abyss, let's get a working definition down. What exactly are we dealing with when we talk about apeirophobia?
It's not just about fearing death. It's deeper than that. It's about the foreverness of it all, the endlessness of existing or even not existing that really gets to people.
I can see how that would be, well, kind of hard to wrap your head around. It's almost like our brains just aren't built to process something so vast,
Exactly. We're wired for limits, boundaries.
Okay.
Infinity throws a wrench into all that, and that's where the fear comes in.
It's not a spider, not a tight space. It's an idea.
Precisely. It's the abstract nature of infinity itself that's the trigger. To really grasp it, it helps to go back to the source. Apeiron, meaning infinite, boundless, and phobos, meaning fear. So we're talking about the fear of boundless existence. Heavy stuff.
And that struggle to grasp, to even imagine infinity, it shows up in some pretty intense ways. We've got these personal accounts, and they're powerful.
Some pretty vivid descriptions in there.
Vivid is putting it mildly.
Yeah.
So what kind of things set people off?
Thinking about space, the afterlife, even the cyclical nature of existence. It's like they're confronting this reality that's just too much to comprehend.
And it's not just, oh, that's a weird thought. We're talking panic attacks, racing thoughts, insomnia.
Yeah, the physical symptoms are very real.
One person even talked about feeling the need to run, to jump.
Trying to escape, literally escape.
From something that isn't even there.
The mind is a powerful thing. There's this one story, a person using cocaine just to avoid sleeping.
Because.
Terrified of those thoughts coming in the quiet of the night.
Wow. I mean, that really shows you how debilitating this fear can be. Another story mentioned someone avoiding having children, like not having kids at all, out of fear of them facing an eternity.
Hard to imagine that level of fear impacting such a major life decision.
So we see how it shows up, but what makes someone vulnerable to apeirophobia in the first place? Is it just like deep thinkers?
Well, the sources suggest it's more complex than that. Childhood experiences seem to play a role, especially if there were feelings of entrapment, helplessness, or even early exposure to rigid religious teachings about eternity.
That makes sense. Like a child trying to grasp eternal damnation. That's heavy stuff for a young mind.
Exactly. It can really leave a mark. And then there's the biology of it all. Things get even more interesting when we look at what's happening in the brain.
Brain stuff.
Brain stuff.
Yeah.
For example, the amygdala, often called the brain's fear center. It seems like it might be more active in people with apeirophobia.
So for someone with apeirophobia, their amygdala is like, whoa, hold up, infinity, danger.
That's a good way to put it. Their internal alarm bells might be set to a higher sensitivity when it comes to that specific trigger. And then there's this thing called the vagal brake.
Vagal what now?
Vagal brake. It's part of our nervous system, and it basically helps regulate our state of being, calm versus fight or flight.
Okay, I'm following.
Well, some research suggests that this system might be a bit out of whack in folks with apeirophobia.
So their brake isn't working right?
Something like that, yeah. Which might explain why those panic attacks can be so sudden and intense.
It's like their body's stuck on high alert, even when there's no real danger. Okay, so we've got early experiences, a sensitive fear center, and this vagal brake thing that might be malfunctioning. Seems like a recipe for a phobia.
And there's one more ingredient to add to this mix. Existential crises. The sources we looked at, they emphasize that apeirophobia often pops up when people are really wrestling with those big questions about life, death, and the meaning of it all.
Because the universe is huge and we're
tiny.
Yeah.
And that can be unsettling, especially when you're trying to wrap your head around the concept of infinity.
It's like the more you think about it, the more terrifying it gets.
For some people, absolutely.
Yeah.
And when those answers just feel out of reach, that's when the fear can really take hold.
You bring up a good point about meaning, because a lot of these personal stories, they mention this search for meaning, right? Like some find comfort in religion.
Provides a framework, a way to make peace with this idea of infinity.
Instead of just this big, scary unknown.
Exactly. Like the idea of a benevolent God or some sort of spiritual realm, it helps them handle the concept of forever.
But then on the flip side, for some people, those same beliefs, they become the source of the fear. There's this one story, a person raised with super strict religious views, lots of talk about hellfire and eternal damnation.
Oh, wow.
And now they're dealing with intense apeirophobia, totally terrified of the afterlife.
It's a reminder that what comforts one person can absolutely terrify another. It's a complicated relationship, religion, and this fear.
It sounds like a constant push and pull, trying to find meaning while also dealing with this deep-seated fear.
It is, and that's why it's important to remember. Everyone experiences apeirophobia differently.
Different triggers,
Different intensity.
different ways of coping.
Exactly. There's no one-size-fits-all definition here. And, reading through these stories, I'm really struck by the different ways people try to cope.
Some people just avoid it, right?
Distraction is a big one. Hobbies, work, socializing, anything to keep those thoughts about infinity away.
Just keep busy.
Yeah, it's a temporary fix, but it can be effective. It provides that sense of grounding.
Back to the finite world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then there are those who kind of dive headfirst into meaning making.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they get into philosophy, science, spiritual practices, almost like they're trying to understand infinity by studying it from every angle.
So knowledge as a shield against fear.
In a way, yes.
Oh.
Some find peace in the scientific understanding of the universe, while others lean towards ancient philosophies or spiritual traditions.
Like turning their fear into fuel for exploration. But let's be real, for some people, those coping mechanisms, they're just not enough. The fear is so strong, it impacts their whole life.
Absolutely. And in those cases, professional help is crucial.
Therapy.
The sources we have, they highlight all sorts of therapeutic approaches that can really make a difference.
So someone struggling with apeirophobia, where do they even start?
Well, one approach that comes up a lot is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT.
CBT, I've heard of that. But how does it work for, like, a fear of infinity?
So CBT focuses on the link between thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. When it comes to apeirophobia, the therapist works with the person to identify and challenge the thoughts that are triggering the fear.
Those negative thoughts that can spiral.
Exactly. Like instead of I'm trapped in this endless cycle and there's no way out, they might learn to reframe it as this is just my anxiety talking. Infinity is an idea, not a threat.
It's about changing how you react to the thought.
Yes. And CBT also gives people practical tools like mindfulness exercises or breathing techniques to manage the anxiety when it does pop up.
So retraining your brain to respond differently to that trigger, that's pretty cool, actually.
It is. And there's another approach called exposure response prevention, or ERP.
Okay, that sounds intense.
It can be challenging, but it basically involves slowly exposing the person to the thing they're afraid of. In this case, thoughts and images related to infinity.
Wait, so you're saying, like, put them in a room with a giant infinity symbol?
Not quite. It's much more gradual and controlled than that. It might start with discussing vast concepts like time or space, and then maybe moving on to visualizations or readings, or even creative writing that touches on the theme of infinity.
Sort of easing them into it.
Exactly. And the whole time, the therapist is there to help them manage their anxiety, learn those coping skills to get through the discomfort.
It's amazing that we can actually change how our brain reacts to a concept. It gives me hope, Like, even a fear like this can be dealt with.
And it's not just about conquering the fear, it's about what comes after. A lot of the accounts we've read, they talk about how dealing with apeirophobia led them to, a deeper appreciation for life.
Yeah.
A feeling of connection to something bigger.
Like facing the fear opened them up to something new.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And remember earlier we talked about the amygdala and the vagal brake, that whole biological side of things.
Yeah, the brain stuff.
Well, there are therapies that specifically target those physical responses.
Oh, interesting. Like what you...
One is based on something called polyvagal theory. It's all about the vagus nerve and how it affects our state of being.
Okay, I'm vaguely familiar with that.
Well, these therapies often use things like breathing exercises, mindfulness, gentle movements, all to stimulate the vagus nerve and shift the nervous system away from that fight or flight mode.
So instead of being stuck in panic mode, they're learning to relax.
Exactly. Gives them a sense of control over those physical reactions. And another one is somatic experiencing. This one focuses on processing trauma that might be feeding into the phobia.
We did talk about how early experiences can play a role. It makes sense that addressing any trauma could be a big part of healing.
Absolutely. Somatic experiencing helps people gently notice and process the feelings in their body, the sensations associated with the fear, so they can release that tension and feel safe again.
So apeirophobia isn't just in your head, it's in your body too.
Exactly. Addressing those physical reactions is just as important as the mental and emotional stuff.
Okay, so what about people who can't get to therapy right away? What can they do on their own?
There are some really practical things people can do. One that comes up again and again is social connection.
Just hanging out with people, how did that help with a fear of infinity?
You'd be surprised. Connecting with loved ones, sharing experiences, it helps combat that feeling of isolation that often comes with a phobia.
It's like a reminder that you're not alone in this big, crazy universe.
Exactly. And managing stress is huge.
Exercise, meditation, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Those things can really help regulate the nervous system and bring down anxiety in general.
Finding those moments of peace.
Yeah, and what we can't forget about sleep. We talked about that person avoiding sleep out of fear. Getting enough rest is crucial for regulating emotions and managing anxiety.
I guess it's hard to think straight when you're exhausted.
And while it might seem counterintuitive for someone scared of those late night thoughts, creating a good bedtime routine, practicing relaxation techniques, even getting professional help for sleep issues, it can make a world of difference.
So it's a whole body approach. Mind, body, and even lifestyle.
And remember, there's no quick fix. It's about finding what works best for you, trying different things, and being patient. Apeirophobia might be tough, but it doesn't have to run your life.
It's a journey, not a sprint. With the right tools and support, you can find your way through. You know, it's kind of wild how we started talking about panic attacks, and now we're like deep in existential territory.
It's almost like the fear forces you to confront these big questions, pushes you into thinking about things you might have otherwise avoided.
We've talked about folks finding comfort in religion, but could facing this fear, this apeirophobia, could it lead someone down a more, I don't know, a more scientific path?
Oh, no, definitely. Some find a lot of comfort in science. Cosmology, astrophysics.
The universe and all that.
Exactly. Can spark this sense of wonder. Replaces the fear with curiosity.
So instead of being afraid of the vastness, they embrace it.
Exactly. It's pretty amazing, right? Turning fear into a thirst for knowledge.
You know, the idea of control keeps coming up in these stories. Apeirophobia, it's often about feeling powerless against this massive concept of infinity. So is finding a way to feel in control, is that key to dealing with this fear?
It's a huge part of it, yeah. And that's where those coping mechanisms and therapies come in. Giving people tools to manage their anxiety.
So they're not just along for the ride, they're steering the ship.
Exactly. Shifting from feeling overwhelmed to feeling empowered. And that can be really powerful for someone who feels like they're at the mercy of this fear. You know, we talked about exposure therapy, but how do you actually do that with a fear of infinity? It's not like a spider you can put in a jar.
Right. How do you expose someone to a concept?
It's got to be gradual, right? You start with things that are less anxiety-provoking, maybe talking about big concepts like time or space, then maybe move to visualizations, readings, even creative writing exercises that explore infinity.
Easing them into the deep end, so to speak.
Yeah. And the therapist is there to help them work through the anxious feelings, give them the skills to cope with the discomfort.
It's really interesting that we can retrain our brains to react differently to like an abstract idea. It does give you hope that even a fear like this, it can be managed.
And it's not just about getting rid of the fear. A lot of these people, they talk about how confronting apeirophobia led to some pretty amazing personal growth, a deeper understanding of themselves, even a sense of peace with the unknown.
It's like by facing their fear, they found a new strength.
And that kind of brings us full circle to what we've been talking about. Apeirophobia, it might seem like a strange fear, but it really gets at something very human. That struggle to make sense of our place in this massive universe.
We started with panic attacks, and now we're basically philosophers.
It's been quite a journey. So to anyone out there listening who might be dealing with apeirophobia or really any kind of fear.
You're not alone.
And your fear doesn't have to define you. And who knows, maybe hidden within that fear, there's a chance for growth, for understanding, even for a deeper appreciation of just how amazing this whole existence thing really is.
That's a great note to end on.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and of course, keep diving deep.